So we think that humans have domesticated grapes for alcohol and not for food. And as you know, around the berries, on the berry skin, there exist yeasts responsible for fermentation. Saccharomyces cerevisiae is naturally present. So we think that it was starting to ferment. And before it turned to vinegar, they have tried it, get a little bit drunk, and they said, wow, we want to start again. It's linked to inebriation.
Welcome to the Wine Podcast. I'm Suzanne Mustacich, and my guest today is the Swiss botanist and grape DNA sleuth, José Vouillamoz. Welcome, José.
Thank you for having me.
So I had read recently that you had been in Turkey, which is where we first met all those years ago. So let's start with your recent adventures. What were you doing in the Taurus Mountains? What were you looking for?
Well, it's true that we first met in Izmir, you and I, at this fantastic digital wine communication conference, which was really a founder event because many of my wine friends today were met in 2012. So it was a fantastic event. And this is also where I met one of my favorite producers in Turkey, not the one in Taurus, another one, Seyit Karagazolu of Pasheli wines. We went to Thrace, northeastern of Turkey, in the European part, where he found a lot of fantastic grapes. One of those is Sidalan, very interesting, the white wine. And another one, we will talk about that later, is Colorco. And I wanted to see where it had been found. So that was my first part of the trip. And then I went to Cappadocia to visit.
Which I love. It's so beautiful.
Fantastic.
So beautiful. Yeah.
To visit the area. I'm a fan of ungrafted vines, Franc de Pied. In French, I'm a member of the Association Franc de Pied, founded in 21 by Loïc Pasquet. I'm a member of the committee, and our honorary president is no less than Prince Albert II of Monaco. So, yes, it is. So
and how did he become interested in vines being planted directly in the soil as opposed to grafted? Do we know?
He's very much interested into wine, and he's a customer of Loïc Pasquet because Loïc Pasquet, as you may know, is the founder and owner of Liber Pater, making the most expensive wine in the world. So the prince is a customer, so they had a chance to talk, and I have a chance to know Loïc not because I'm a customer of his wine, impossible for me, but because he's very fond of ungrafted vineyards. And I was with Loïc and a group of friends from this association in Cappadocia. We visited many wineries, Gelveri, for example, by Udo Hirsch, who is rescuing old varieties in villages where people don't know what they have in the vineyard. We were with Cavaclidere, which is a much bigger company, one of the biggest, one of the largest in the country, who are also replanting varieties ungrafted. And last part of the trip, I went to the Taurus Mountain together with Burak Özkan, who created Likya wines, not far from Antalya. And he's fascinated with old vines that are lost in the mountain that have been maintained by local people as table grapes, but as we are convinced, used to be wine grapes before Islamization of the area. So together with him, we went grape hunting, which means we are trying to find the location where these old vines are still used, and they use it as married vines, which means they have been on purpose planted next to a tree so that the vine naturally climbs up the tree, and then people go climb and harvest the grapes before to make wine, today to eat them or to make kind of molasses called petsmek. So we found a lot of interesting things, and this guy of Likya Wines likes to come back at harvest time, taste the grapes, measure the acidity, measure the sugar, and try to identify which one is best suited for winemaking. And he already has 3 or 4 wines on in his portfolio made from vines found in the nature.
I mean, that's extraordinary. I just have a question, because we talk about domestication. We'll get to that later. But isn't this essentially how domestication, we think, started? Is that people were growing where they were picking wild grapes, and then they decided that some are better than others, and then they maybe took a cutting or replanted? Do you think that that's how it worked?
What we observe today in Taurus Mountain is not this, because the vines are superb, are very old, big trunks. They are like trees, but they are maybe 200, 300 years old.
Wow.
Domestication occurred 10 to 12,000 years ago. So it's much longer time. And together with Patrick McGovern, late Patrick McGovern, who left us last year at age 80, we went a few times together in the Middle East. We went to Turkey, we went to Armenia, Georgia, together to try to understand the domestication. And I came up with the idea of the hermaphroditic hypothesis. Because if you look at the flowers of a grape that is cultivated, in each of the tiny flowers, you don't need a lens, you see it. In each of the tiny flowers, you see the stamen with the pollen and the pistil. And the pollen goes on the pistil, fertilization, babies, I mean berries, are formed, and the babies are the grape seeds, the grape pips.
Okay.
So if you look at a wild vine, Vitis sylvestris, you have flowers that are 100% male and flowers that are 100% female. And we have observed, together with Patrick McGovern and other botanists have observed, in a natural population. We found one really spectacular at the headwaters of the Tigris River. We found it in 2003. And I remember clearly, we were looking at the flowers, it was the right time, and Patrick was 100 meters away, and I said, Patrick, I have found one. And I had one vine of wild grapes that was hermaphroditic, both male and female. And this hypothesis that I made up is very simple. If you're a Neolithic man or woman, and you like to harvest the grape or to eat them, and you want to plant it, you take cuttings. Taking cuttings has been done since ages. You plant it in front of your cave or your whatever. If you take a male, you will never have berries. If you take a female and there's no male around, never have berries. If you take, by chance, a hermaphroditic plant, you have berries, and you will want to keep this one. So you will take cuttings or you multiply from this one. And this is the starting point of domestication. It might have occurred, it has occurred several times in different locations on the planet.
Do you think they observe the ones that are making the grapes that they like?
Well, our hypothesis, the other one, is the Noah hypothesis. And it's linked to inebriation. Because if you look at the wild vine, it's growing up the trees. It's very dangerous to climb and harvest it. In the Taurus Mountain, they are still doing it for molasses. And some people have been seriously injured, or even some of them have died. So it's very dangerous. You need to be very quick because you need to get to the berries before the birds. And the food supply is not really good. You have a little bit of sugar, but wild grape vines, we will talk about that, are very acidic. The bunches are very loose. There's not so much to eat. But if you harvest them, and you harvest them in enough quantity to put them in a crevice or in a wooden basket, with the weight of the bunches, the juice would exude from the berries. And as you know, around the berries, on the berry skin, there exist yeasts responsible for fermentation. Saccharomyces cerevisiae is naturally present. So we think that it was starting to ferment. And before it turned to vinegar, they have tried it, get a little bit drunk, and they said, wow, we want to start again. Or they said, I have an illumination, I can speak to the spirits, I can speak to the dead, and it becomes a ritual. Maybe
it happened that way.
Happened that way. So we think that humans have domesticated grapes for alcohol and not for food.
Oh, so you don't think that this was a selection for food, and some were better for food and some were better for wine? No. Or
initially,
for fermentation?
No. Our hypothesis is for alcohol. Then when they had a chance to domesticate it for different purposes, they have selected by generation to generation. It's empirical selection. They have discarded the ones that were too acidic and favored the ones that were more sweet, the ones with bigger bunches, bigger berries. And this is the starting point of domestication. Together with Patrick McGovern, we had tried to identify where did this happen.
Right.
23 years ago, and we published a paper saying that it most likely happened for the first time in southeastern Anatolia, southeastern Turkey, close to Kurdistan, where I think you've been.
I've been there, yep.
And this was our conclusion, but we had a few hundreds of samples, and this was the best we could do. Genetically speaking, I compared the wild grape wines with the cultivated varieties, the most ancient ones, and Patrick was investigating the archaeological sites of the area to see if we had found residues of wine in the jars and in the archaeological artifacts. So that's what we did. In 23, so 20 years later, a huge study was published, I think in Nature magazine, run by Chinese people, surprisingly, but with, I think, 34 authors, 2,300 something samples. It was much bigger. They had much more money than we did 20 years ago. And their conclusion, by genetics, they confirmed our first hypothesis that a domestication occurred in southeastern Turkey, but also another one in Transcaucasia, which is Armenia and Georgia. And then they compared the roots, and which is fascinating, the one that was domesticated in Transcaucasia went through the northern part of the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. The generations reached the western part of the Balkans, Romania, Bulgaria, a little bit of Hungary. But then it stopped. Genetically speaking, you cannot follow it. And the one from southeastern Turkey gave table grapes that you find in the Levant, table grapes that you find in North Africa up to Morocco, and also wine grapes that crossed Turkey, Greece, Dalmatian coast, Italy, another route, France, Spain, and that's it.
So are they following trade routes, do you think?
Of course, yeah. Which is fascinating because if you look at the map of this study, it's based on genetics. But if you look at the trade routes of the Phoenicians, starting from Lebanon and colonizing all the Mediterranean, from the Greeks who have founded Marseille, for example, and all the routes of colonization follow the genetic path, and vice versa.
So people are taking, when they're going on a ship or they're going over mountains to go to either to trade or maybe they're moving, they're taking some of the plant material with them.
Yes.
Yeah.
What we don't know, and we will speak about a very recent research, what we don't know is whether they were carrying grape seeds or cuttings. And there's a big difference. As I said, multiplying plants by cuttings has been known since 3,000 or 4,000 years. We have stone drawing evidence of this knowledge, not for grapevines, but for other plants. When you multiply your strawberries or your tomato, you do the same. We don't know if they were carrying the vine itself or the pips. It makes a big difference because if you plant a grape pip, if you have a Merlot in your house, you take a seed of Merlot, you plant it, you will have a plant growing. It will not be Merlot anymore. It will be a child of Merlot. It will be the next generation. If you do it with wheat, for example, the genetic of wheat is so narrow in terms of diversity. We say homozygosity in genetics, that you don't see the difference. But grapes are very diverse. We say heterozygous, just like us. And I always say, let's imagine that I could get pregnant from myself, and I would grow my own baby and deliver the baby. It would be surely a monster, but it would not be me. It will be a new generation. And you lose the qualities. So if you want to keep the qualities of your Merlot or the qualities of your Pinot, you need to go through cuttings. And I would like to know exactly when it started. There is this recent ancient DNA research showing, by analyzing grape pips from France.
I think it's really interesting because it just means that at some point, what you're saying is somebody understood that it was better to take a cutting than to use the seed.
Yeah.
The pip. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, there's extraordinary knowledge. And that's what I was thinking when you were talking about this modern Turkish wine grower trying out with testing different grapes. Is that same process is what was done thousands of years ago?
Probably. And I can imagine. if you plant, you have your favorite vine. The wild grape vine is red berried. So let's say you have a red berried vine, you want to keep it, and you plant a seed, and the new plant is white berried. You're not happy with that. You want to get back to the red one.
So the white grape is a mutation.
It is, yes.
Okay.
So yeah, it happened that way, and varieties were selected for their capacities, for their characteristics, and at one point we realized that it was better to propagate them with cuttings.
It's en primeur season right now, and this episode is brought to you by Ideal Wine, specialists in fine wine and auctions. They're based in France with over 25 years' experience shipping the finest Bordeaux all around the world, including the US, the UK, and all over Europe, as well as Hong Kong, Singapore, Korea, and more.
And international clients can enjoy 6 months of complimentary storage in France for all en primeur purchases over €3,000, so you can ship when it suits best.
Ideal Wine have kindly given a special discount that is only available for Jane Anson podcast listeners. You can enjoy €50 off your first en primeur purchase just by using the code Jane Anson.
And do sign up for their website to receive alerts when the wine you want is released and enjoy personalized advice from their very experienced team.
There's more information and some terms and conditions in the show notes below. So let's get on with the podcast.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ideal Wine.
Okay, so talk to me just about Kolorko, which is identical to Furmint in Hungary. So that means this grape variety from Turkey made its way to Hungary, and were they then...
I think it happened the other way around. I think it came from Hungary, it came from Türkiye to Turkey.
It came the other way.
Yes, of course. Of course, but because I think it's rather recent. We're not talking about 10,000 years ago. We're speaking about 300 years ago. The discovery started with Seyit Karagazolu of Pasali Wines, who made me try his Kolorko wine in 2012 in Izmir. And I said, wow, that's fantastic. And every year I got 1 or 2 bottles of it.
And it reminded you of something that you tasted in Hungary?
No, not at all. No. It's not possible. You have no hint. And your brain will never say, "Oh, this looks like Furmint," and then they are very, very different for other reasons. But at some point, I said, "Say it. We need to know what this Kolorko is, and also your Sidelan and other Chalcarase, etc." So send me the leaves, and I will do the DNA profiling, which I did. And at first, I thought it was a mistake in my lab, but it couldn't be a mistake because during this DNA session, I had no Furmint in the lab. But anyway, Kolorko matched Furmint, 2017. And I said, we need to start again next year. Take another sample. We had to go back to the old vineyard. It's almost impossible. Take another sample. Another sample, same. 100% Furmint with the DNA. So we started to think, how could this happen? How could this happen? It's been cultivated in this area since at least the beginning of the 19th century, or 20th century, almost abandoned in the 60s. And rescued by Seyit in 2005. So this Kolorko was an old, supposedly local variety on the brink of extinction when Seyit rescued it. So we contacted Istvan Shepsi Jr., who is one of the most famous winemakers and the son of the most famous winemaker in Türkiye, Istvan Shepsi Senior, to try to understand. And he gave us an idea. We had to look at Francis Rakoczy, who was prince and the general of the army who was trying to defeat the Habsburg and defending Türkiye area. And his family was the biggest vineyard owner in Türkiye. And when he lost against the Habsburg, he had to flee from Türkiye. And he had already connections with the Ottomans. So he ended up in Tekirdağ. Tekirdağ is not far from Istanbul, 2 hours from Istanbul and in the western direction. And it used to have a Hungarian name, Rodostok.
That's interesting.
So it had a Hungarian population. So there is no document, but we are convinced that this guy had to run away from Türkiye. I think he first went to France, then to some other place, and ended up in Tekirdağ, where he stayed for 18 years. So I don't think he traveled in all these different regions with vines, but he had contacts in his homeland, Türkiye, and he probably sent a letter, bring me some cuttings of Furmint, and he planted it there. This is the story, but we have no idea why they gave it the name Colorco.
Does that word mean anything else? Is it like a root word for something else? No.
No, they don't know.
So we'll never know. Maybe it was the name of a friend of his or something, or maybe who knows what it was. Yeah.
Could be the name of a guy, could be
the name of a place. We've forgotten the name now.
Yeah. Or somebody who's had a mispronunciation of something that was written down. And so Furmint, I'm convinced that it does originate from Turkey because the genetic diversity within the grape is very important in Turkey and non-existent in Turkey. And also in Turkey, you have color mutations. There is a pink version of Furmint that does not exist in Turkey. So when you have biodiversity that is important in any organism, usually it's the place where it originates.
Let's talk a minute about France. So you've written a book about French varieties. You're the co-author of the groundbreaking wine grapes with Julia Harding and Jancis Robinson. Now, in France, researchers have recently analyzed 54 archaeological grape seeds from sites across France, going back to 2300 BC to the Middle Ages. And they came up with some interesting discoveries, one of them with the Pinot Noir. So what was your thoughts?
Well, I love that kind of studies. I'm really sad to not be part of it anymore. I tried again with Patrick McGovern, 2003. He gave me grape seeds from Armenia, dated 2200 before Christ. So they were 4,200 years old. And I think he had 6 and he gave me 2 that I took to the lab, brand new lab, because you want to avoid contamination because there's little amount of DNA. I tried my best more than 20 years ago, and I could not extract enough DNA from that. So I'm very happy that some people managed to do so at the moment. We have the technique that we have today is much more efficient and precise than what we were doing 23 years ago. And these people from France analyze these grape pips, and you need to be lucky because these grape pips need to have been preserved, waterlogged, as we say, in a humid environment, if possible, underwater. If your grape pips were eaten and then thrown in a fire and carbonized, they will keep their shape, but the DNA is completely gone. So they were lucky to find enough grape seeds that were well preserved. And their finding was really fascinating because they had evidence of the use of wild grapevines. 2,000 or 3,000 BC, they were already using wild grapevine, which is not a big surprise. Domesticated varieties appeared during the Iron Age, 800 to 600 BC. And then also they were able to find different grape pips having the same DNA at different periods, which was evidence that they had been propagated vegetatively by cuttings. And I think the oldest evidence for cuttings is 600 BC. I don't have all the numbers in my head. You can find the original paper in Nature. And what is for sure, they found in Valenciennes, north of France, they found a grape pip that is 100% identical to Pinot Noir, dating back to 600 years.
Isn't that extraordinary, though?
It is extraordinary. It is absolutely fascinating. It shows that Pinot Noir has been cultivated at least since 600 years and has been propagated vegetatively. I think it's much older than that. Maybe it's 2,000 years old, but we have no evidence.
I was going to ask you about ancient clonal propagation and the movement of grapes across, vast regions, mountain regions, the sea. Obviously, it goes with colonizers, goes with trade. But what do you think this tells us about us as humans and our connection to wine?
So, as I said, we believe that the first reason for domestication was alcohol. But then, in regions like Türkiye, today, this molasses, pekmez, it's sweeter than honey. So it brings energy. It brings food.
So then it becomes like calories.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
When you're starving during the winter, if you have pekmez, it might help you survive. So maybe it was a way of communicating with the spirits or with the dead or whatever, but also a way of surviving in the winter. And they are still preparing these molasses, or they're preparing long branches of molasses that is dried and they put some almonds inside and they eat it. It's for surviving. So maybe they were always bringing vines with them for these two reasons, spiritual reason and food reason.
That's the end of part 1. We'll see you back here for part 2. This podcast is produced in partnership with Wine Voices, brought to you by Wine Searcher, the world's largest online wine and spirits database.
With Wine Searcher Pro, you can see all the search results, guaranteeing the lowest prices, and you can unlock powerful tools to search, compare, and discover more about the wines that you want.
And right now, you can get a 10% off a 12-month Pro subscription with the code JaneWS at checkout.
That's Jane WS. It's just a little thank you for being part of our Wine Voices community and for tuning in here.
Follow the link in the description to begin your journey with Wine Searcher.
And thank you. Please come back for the next podcast.
That's right. See you then.